Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on miamighostchronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind the scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? Good, I hope. I'm still, like I said, still earlobe deep in South Florida summer. Okay, so you know what that means. Humid, hot, sticky, but yeah, even having been raised here, I'm telling you, talk about hot. But anyway, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my guest today. And again, this is somebody, and I've had some guests before that, and I always point this out. This is somebody who was involved with the paranormal long before all the big mainstream interest in it that you've seen maybe in the last 10 years or the 15 years where, all the reality TV shows. This is like way before when you tell anybody that this is what you did, you would get a really weird look. But anyway, the gentleman that I have with me today, his name is Lon Strickler. Now, he is a fortean researcher and author of several books. He writes the Phantom and Monsters blog. He's a co-host at The Existence of Strange Things on RadioMemphis.com. He's also an intuitive and a mystic at Astral Perceptions Universal. Now, he's been involved in this since the 1970s, folks. That's over 40 years, and which he's been researching supernatural subjects. And some of the books that he's written about have to do with the Mothman, unexplained encounters, you name it, because that's the thing. And I'm hoping we're going to talk to Lon about that is, despite what everybody thinks, there's a lot of weird stuff besides the ghost and the Bigfoot stuff. There's a lot of cryptids and unusual and bizarre things out there that sometimes go a little bit under the radar. Okay, so how are you doing today, Ron?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure. And Lon, I like, and the reason why I mention this is that everybody knows that Marlene always points out about when, and we were talking about it briefly right before we started, the difference as far as anybody that was involved, whether doing personal research or even if you were with a team of people, between, and especially you that you've been doing since the 1970s to now, how much more basic it was as far as way back when you wanted to, you had an experience, and sometimes the best you could hope for was a witness. That somebody else was there with you.
Yeah, it was quite different back then. I mean, I was telling you earlier, I remember the times I would go into a home and, you know, I don't even know if we called them EVPs back then, but I remember carrying the cassette tape recorder along with me, and sometimes you got it, sometimes you didn't, but it was pretty rudimentary. I kind of used my intuitive ability the best I could for everything I did. So
Okay.
yeah, it was way before what it is today.
Now I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests. Is obviously you're very much involved now in the paranormal, but how did you have an experience that got you interested in this as a child? Anything like that?
Well, I was born and raised in Hanover, Pennsylvania. I actually lived there again after 40 years living near Baltimore. But I spent a lot of time on the Gettysburg battlefield as a kid, and it was very, very close to me. It was only like 11 miles
Really?
down the road. So what I would do, I'd get on my bike and I just spend the day there. Spent a lot of summers there.
Wow.
So, I know the battlefield inside. Actually, I did some tour guide work there later on, but I was about 8 years old one day. I was in an area of the battlefield they called Death Valley, which lies in between Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the wheat field. So there was a lot of action there, especially on the second day.
Okay.
And what happened was I was on my bike. I was on the road riding towards Devil Den, and I just suddenly started hearing gunfire and cannon fire, and it's like
What?
everything opened up for me. Started to smell gunpowder, started seeing apparitions, smelled blood,
What?
decay, everything. Yeah, my senses just opened up all of a sudden. And that's the first that it happened to me like that. Now, I knew that I could sense spiritual energy, but not to that extent. And I don't know what had opened up. I must have gone through some type of time slip or something. But
Okay.
it's not the only time it happened. That happened several times. I used to sneak onto the battlefield at night. Used to sleep there at night sometime, camp out,
Wow.
and it's something I had really never really paid much attention to, as far as being intuitive. But I didn't live in a haunted house or anything like that. I don't even think my
Right.
parents knew much about what I was going through, because I just really just kept it to myself. So yeah, so that's the way it was. And when I got older and started getting interested in the paranormal a bit more, I started going to locations and doing my own private investigations.
Mm-hmm.
Then it got to the point where people were calling me and asking me to come into their homes and businesses or a location.
Okay.
So that's how it kind of developed.
And I don't know, did you have any experience way back then where when people asked you to come and investigate, people sometimes were very, very cautious about that because it's not like now. Most people realize, wow, if this gets out, I don't want anybody to know that I think that there's something going on in my house, so people
Yeah,
were,
people were they were hesitant.
yeah.
It was kind of all a word by mouth thing, and in fact, I remember the first time I went to someone's place, I was asked by their daughter, who I went to school with, if I wouldn't mind coming over, because she had known about what I was doing, and her and I had talked about it, and
Wow.
she told her parents. But it was just a regular house. It wasn't an older house. It was like a ranch style home, and
Uh-huh.
it was haunted. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There was spirit energy in there. Like most places that I have investigated, private places that I investigated over the years, it kind of lends itself toward a lot of dysfunction or problems within the
Yes.
home, where it's just fed.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that was the situation there. But I didn't know how to clear at that time.
Right.
But I kind of worked it out with them and let them know what I thought was going on. And I told them, I was I was in high school, but I told them, I said, you gotta calm things down around here, because you're just making it worse for yourself. Which is kind of unusual for a kid to tell an adult that
Yeah.
back at that time. But sometimes when I did this, it did get me in a bind, and I tried to make it as smooth as possible. I lived in an area, and it is an area that's very conservative, a lot of
Okay.
old German background, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's still, it's unusual. It's still kind of a secretive thing. People don't like to talk about it.
Right.
But I moved back to this town back in June of 2016, about 6 months after my wife passed, and my
Oh.
son and I moved back up here. And since that time, I have actually worked, as of last week, I've actually cleared 19 homes in this town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So the activity has picked up. I don't know if it's because I came to town or it's just something that
It's
never
like,
happened.
hey.
Yeah. We're so near Gettysburg. So, I don't know if it has any residual effect or not, but, there has been one well-known haunting in this town that's been going on for years. And, some of the cases I took on were actually near that home. So I don't know if it's something to do with that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's an unusual situation. So yeah, I've been pretty busy.
So, do you think that it was, in other words, you're not sure whether it was just residual? Sometimes negative stuff that happens in the house, it'll stay layered there, or if there was any intelligent haunting, or was it, like you said, sometimes even PK energy given up like you said, in an atmosphere that's supercharged, depending on what's going on by whoever lives there over a
Yeah,
length
I
of
think
period. Not just
yeah,
because
I
of one
think most
argument.
of the I think most of these cases that I have taken on over the years
Mm-hmm.
are like you said, PK, possible poltergeist that's manifested by somebody in the home.
Okay.
I also do distance clearing. I was trained to remote view about 8 years ago. I
Okay.
use that as well in what I do. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think that is the major reason why people get activity. For whatever reason, they pick something up, something attaches to them.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I seem to work with a lot of people who have benign abilities,
Right.
and they really don't know why these energies keep attaching to them.
Okay.
And they bring into the house. If there's some things going on in the house, it just magnifies the
Yes.
activity. So yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. That's mostly what I run into.
Let me ask you, because I know I'm not sure exactly what area of Pennsylvania, but I know out there they have the powwow magic or powwowing.
Yeah, I
Um,
grew up with it.
you've come up against that, and
Yeah, I actually had an aunt who was a powwower, and
oh, really? Okay.
yeah, that's I've written about it a couple
You
times.
okay?
But I have family that have actually been powwowers over the
Okay.
years. It's not prevalent now. In fact, the state basically outlaws it, but it's a folk magic.
How can they
Uh,
outlaw something like that? How can they
well,
do
there
that?
was a famous murder here in York County back in the 30s, the Hex Hollow murders,
Yeah, that I'm
and
familiar
the
with that,
the
but still,
Rama. Yeah, go ahead.
that could be, that was somebody that was obviously, but it's like, okay, you're gonna outlaw people with that are crazy, because obviously some people, if they're mentally ill or something, they'll use any pretext. It wouldn't be the first time, but I wasn't aware that they had actually outlawed it up there. Wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty
yeah,
extreme.
it's still in the books too.
Oh
But
my
there's
God.
still a lot of active powwowers here in Pennsylvania. But basically, powwowing is nothing more than just Appalachian folklore.
Right.
It's almost the same thing that you'll find being practiced the whole way up and down the Appalachians. I mean, it's practically the
Mm-hmm.
same thing you find in West Virginia and Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky and North Carolina. There's these root conjurers and these folk magic healers. It's almost all the same. It's not much really that whole lot difference to it.
Do you think it's died out because, and I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, that a lot of it was passed down by oral tradition? In other words, that's how people were taught. Like, you had somebody either in your family or whatever kind of show
Yeah,
you. As it wasn't like, oh, here's the book. It was like you learned by directly from another person that practiced it.
yeah. It was rarely taught to someone outside the family. It was
Right,
kind of
exactly.
passed
That's what I've
down.
heard.
Uh, a lot of times it was passed down from like not parents to children, but like aunts and uncles to
Mm-hmm.
nieces and nephews. That seemed to be what happened a lot.
Okay.
And I was pretty familiar with it. And in fact, and I kind of hate to admit this, but I always keep a long lost friend with me all the time.
Really?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, I do. I keep it around me.
Okay.
I keep a talisman with me as well. So
Okay.
I'm it's kind of ingrained in you, but
Exactly. Exactly.
and I'm not a religious person,
No, no,
really.
but I
I
totally understand. I
yeah,
totally understand.
yeah.
Yeah, you grow up with certain beliefs, and even it, and let me tell you something, especially when it's coming from authority figures, as in a family member or parent, it's really hard that even though, like you said, your logical mind kind of like explains it away, there's a part of you that's like, just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really practiced it, but I'm very familiar with how it's practiced. And,
Mm-hmm.
I have talked to several practitioners, what they call hexmeisters or whatever they want
Right.
to call themselves. Um, and, I've kind of learned a little bit here and there over the years, but it's not necessarily what I do. I do some different things.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, you know what? But to be honest with you, I think that anybody that's in this field, especially if which part of what you end up doing is what you're doing, which is going into houses and to clear them. The more
Mhm.
knowledge you have about different belief systems or origins of what might be there, it's better for you. It's helpful to whoever you're helping, because sometimes people move into locations and they really have no idea what or who was there before them. And sometimes they're like, we don't get why this is happening, or we're hearing or experiencing this, and they're totally out in left field. And the more knowledgeable you are, the better it is for whoever it is that you're trying to help.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I run across a lot of things that I had really no idea about. In fact, I had a case that wasn't far from here, where a woman who was a Bahamian uh, descent. She had lived in New York, and her grandmother was actually an Obe priestess.
Uh huh.
And apparently, what happened was when her grandmother passed, and since she lived with her grandmother, the tradition was, and apparently she had kind of upset a few people over the years, and there was a curse on her, and it was automatically transferred to her.
Wow.
So when she moved with her family to this part of the country here in southern Pennsylvania, I she called me one day, and she was having all kinds of crazy things going on. And basically, what she had was some type of entity, and I never really have been able to figure it out, but
Yeah.
it was just messing with her all the time, especially when
Yes.
she was sleeping.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I attributed to a lot of what was going on with the Obe religion, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's just one of the many Creole religions.
Right.
And it's a little different than voodoo or Santeria, but it's it's basically the same. There's some religion, actual Christian religion mixed in with it and
Oh yeah.
such.
Yeah. Yeah. There's.
So I did my homework and did some work with her, and eventually we ended up clearing it out of there. So
Wow.
it took a while.
Yeah, but people don't realize that a lot of the those religions, like you said, Santeria, Voodoo, Candomblé, all these, that they're different, but they're kind of the same roots, which is the African nature religions. A lot of them, when they do curse, they use the spirits, in other words, as emissaries, as part of the curse. In other words,
Hmm.
they bind the soul, usually, of course, one that is a discarnate. In other words, that hasn't um, hasn't ascended. In other words, it's trapped or caught or whatever, and they bind it and they use it in a lot of their curse work. So I'm not
Mm.
surprised when you told me that this is what it was, because I've heard of other people, not because they got it inherited from their grandmother. Poor lady, she must have been darn. But yeah, I've heard of other people having similar experiences along those lines. Um, and yeah, yeah, it's a very unusual thing. People don't
Well,
realize.
interestingly enough, I do all kinds of research with different types of phenomena. And this kind of folk magic, folk religion takes comes into play a lot of times with a lot of different phenomena. I mean, even with
Mm,
cryptid uh, manifestations, it does. When you start digging deep into it, you start realizing, you
okay.
know, here we got some type of cult magic or something getting
Yes.
involved. And then you got to learn how to deal with that too. So yeah, it
Yeah.
comes into a lot of different aspects of my work.
Sure. And let me tell you something. Your knowledge must be priceless. I'm telling you, it must be priceless, because, like you said, there's so many different religious slash magical belief systems out there. There's a lot of them that people sometimes have no idea that the root cause of maybe what's going on at their location or to them is that, especially if it was something done in the land. If I mean, it could be a whole host of things. So I'm telling you, your knowledge is priceless for somebody that asks you to come in and help them out. Because I've heard of people asking for help and it ends up getting worse because somebody that goes in there doesn't really know what they're doing.
Well, that's a big problem. That is
Yes.
really a big problem. I have had many cases where that's happened, where someone starts experiencing activity, and the
Uh-huh.
first thing you do is they get on the internet and start checking for the first paranormal group in the area they can find, or
Yeah.
who will come out there.
Yes.
And they come in there, usually exasperate everything.
Yeah.
And and in fact, I have been in situations after several priests have been in, and they go running out of the house because they get scared,
Yes.
and then people call me.
Exactly. Exactly. Especially, and eh, don't get me wrong, I think that there's times where, yes, where the rites of exorcism are going to
Hmm.
work. A lot of it depends on the circumstances, what's happening there, etc., etc. But there's a lot of non-human entities, okay, which are not, that precede Judeo-Christian belief systems.
Oh
And
yeah,
the rites
yeah,
of
that's true.
exorcism, it's not going to do kind of anything, you know.
Hey,
So,
I've gotten to situations where I have told a client that I can't do anything else for you. You're going to have to call a qualified priest, somebody who was taught in the rites of exorcism. And I'm at the point where I just can't help you anymore.
right.
But they got to bring the right person in there,
Yes.
and that's not easy to do because normally you've got to get somebody from out of state who's been
Mm-hmm.
involved with this before. And though I know the Catholic Church is actually recruiting more people over the years now, and I don't know if that's really helping or kind of expanding on people thinking that they're having problems. But yeah, and you're right about the non-terrestrial, non-human type entities.
Yes.
There are having cases I've been involved with, and cases that I know with other people. Some well-known cases actually that people thought that they were being infested by a human-based or earthbound energy, and it turns out it's something completely different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's out there, and it happens more than
Yes.
people realize.
Yes. And contrary to what people think of as, I'm gonna use the D word. It's not a demon. There's a lot of
Yeah, I hate
non-human
that word.
entities out there that don't fall into the category of the demon. Because, and the reason I'm poking fun at it because I really think that word is overused.
Oh,
Everything is
sure.
a demon.
I don't like the word I
I
never
know.
use the word demon. People tell me, well, I think I've got a demon. Well,
Yeah, it's like
you know, it, there's evil and there's evil. You can call it what you want to call it.
exactly.
Demon is a religious term as far as I'm concerned. I know the church overuses it. It's
Mm-hmm.
always meant to be the devil, Lucifer, or whatever, or one of their minions. But evil is evil, and
Exactly.
it's all treated the same way, and it's just a matter of the degree of the malevolency, and that's what you're there to determine.
Of course. And people don't realize that, of course, because thanks to Hollywood, people, when they think of the rites of exorcism as far as the Catholic religion is concerned, sometimes people go through years
Mm-hmm.
being exorcised.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks that, you spend a weekend or a few days or a day and, things fly around and you spit up pea soup and then it's over. If you look, um, people sometimes go throughout years with like a regular appointment to have an exorcist work with them,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And even once they are finally cleansed, they were always walking a very thin line.
Well, they're
Uh,
susceptible.
yes, absolutely. That's why I laugh when people say, like what you just said earlier, oh, I've got a demon. I was like, shut up. You don't know what you're saying. Shut up. That's the last thing you want. That's,
Well, and like I said before, it's usually people that are susceptible to these malevolent
yes,
attachments are people that have abilities. And
yes.
I work with a fairly large number of very young physical mediums
Mm-hmm.
who, when they're 8, 10, 12 years old and they have no idea what's going on, the parents are scared to death. Um, then they start asking you for help, and I run across that a lot, even with
Okay.
adults that have abilities. And the thing I tell them, the first thing I tell them is, look, I think you need to get some meditation training and to start learning how to control this yourself,
Yes.
because it's something that's just not going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you can learn to dim the attraction to you and to keep yourself calm and not exasperate the situation, and to stop the fear that results when you see something that you're not familiar with,
Right.
that's 99% of the battle right there.
Exactly. And people don't realize that being a physical medium can does drain you physically if you
Oh yeah.
don't have good boundaries up. Or because a lot of the, how can I say, the process of being a physical medium is you actually, well, you whether you allow them to channel or not, but you sometimes feel basically what that entity either experience or wants you to experience, and it takes a lot out of you. So yeah, that's very good advice as far as if somebody's a physical medium, and people don't realize that not you could be psychic and not necessarily be a physical medium.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Well, look, that's what I am.
Yeah.
I'm an intuitive. I'm more clairvoyant than anything else, but I'm not a physical medium.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to train to be a remote viewer, which is a process that took actually over a year to
Wow.
do, uh, when I started using in my work, some people are surprised. I'm quite sure you wouldn't be, but I would be physically attacked at a distance.
Yes.
And I mean physical, where there are scratches and bruises and all kinds of
Yes.
uh, all kinds of maladies because of it.
Mm-hmm.
I would normally do it when I do a session, and this still happens. When I do a session, say a session will take an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm usually so drained I can't do much of anything for at least 24 hours.
Yes.
And but there have been times when I've had to live with the pains, and I still have some of the battle scars.
Yes. And people don't realize that even besides the being a physical medium, by the way, like you said, any type of psychic work,
Hmm.
it can be physically draining. It does. It is physically draining. That's why people say, oh, because I'm psychic. And it's like, you know how, and I tell everybody, back in the, when spiritualism was going on and, like Houdini and all these people running around trying to expose all these spiritualists and mediums. And yeah, some of them were out and out, they were not real. But I tell everybody, you know what? I bet you that there was a lot of them that were, but you can't do it every single day on demand because sometimes it is so exhausting. But some of these people, if you were paying your bills by connecting with the other side, guess what? There was probably times that they did make stuff up, or do whatever, they were doing to produce something. But it wasn't that they weren't. It's just that you cannot do it on a regular day-to-day, day-after-day basis because
or do it
you're just like,
effectively. Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, when I get ready to do a session, of course I do a lot of protection, and I have to basically condition myself before I do anything because I know what I'm going to feel like when it's over, and
right.
I try not to schedule much of anything afterwards,
because
which isn't always easy to do.
Yes, I know.
Because a lot of times it's one of those deals where somebody will literally call you on the phone and beg you to come over to their home and to work with, see what's going on and to give them an idea what's going on. And that can be pretty bad because you really have no idea what you're getting into. You got a sense of what's going on, but really you don't know what's going to happen. So, it takes its toll. I think every time you do a case, a little piece of you is taken away. And
let me ask you something, Lon. And I usually ask paranormal researchers who've been doing it for a few years. And I don't know if you've had this experience where sometimes, even before or are contacted about a case, things start happening. In other words, which I tell everybody, that was my first tip-off that there was something intelligent hunting or something over there. Because even sometimes before I actually knew it, I would have little things starting to happen at my house, around me. And I would be like, huh? Okay. After a while, I caught on. I was like, okay, any day now, I'm going to get either a phone call or then later on an email. And thanks for just giving me the heads up because now I realize that there is something there because otherwise none of this would be happening. In other words, because time and space is not the same for an intelligent entity over there, discarnate. Have you ever had that experience where before you even knew about it, things were happening around you or in your house?
Well, what happens to me is I pretty well keep my habitat pretty clear. I mean, and pretty protected. So I don't normally have anything going on around me. But what does happen a lot of times, and I warn people about this before when I talk to them, and invariably it happens, and a lot of my clients can tell you what happens. I will talk to them, and let's say somebody calls me at like 6 o'clock in the afternoon and said, "Look, I got this and this going on, and I can't do it. It's beyond control now. Something needs to be done quickly." So I will tell them, "Look, I will actually start working on your location. I get the location, the address, and everything. I will work on your location, maybe 2,000 miles away from me, but I'll start working on the location remotely." And but I warn them, if you start hearing stuff, you start seeing lights flashing about, you start hearing static-like sounds, that's me.
Right. Yes.
So I have one particular that was pretty interesting. I had a gentleman just outside of Atlanta who was telling me about all the things that were going on in his office. He's got an upstairs office in his house, and he had actual large equipment being picked up off the floor and dropped and stuff. And he said, "I have to have something done. It's scaring the family. Something's got to be done about this." So I told him, I said, "Well, look, do me a favor, go downstairs, sit in the living room and do what you got to do, but stay out of that room tonight." Fine. So about an hour and a half later, he calls me back up. And he told me, he said, you know, I can't believe what's going on there. He said there are lights flying out of the door. I mean, out of the doorway. They're flashing. There's
Wow.
banging. He said it looked like somebody set fireworks off in there. And I told him, I said, I warned you. I said, you know, but I worked with him a little bit more, and we pretty well got things straightened out there. And I haven't had to go back in, for at least 2 years now. So yeah, it looks like things worked out, but that can tend to happen.
Sure.
I don't know exactly what it is. I'm a big believer in angels, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of call upon my squadron to come in and do some work,
Okay.
and that's usually what causes all of that, from what I can tell. But
Okay.
it's not just me; it's whatever's working with me at the time.
Okay. Right. Exactly. And I tell everybody because I used to do hypnotherapy before. I don't have time anymore. But I used to work in alternative hypnotherapy, and people would come to me for your regular stuff like I want to stop smoking, I want to drop some of my bad habits, stuff like that. And
Mm.
then I would do the alternative, which is I would have people that would come in with what they thought were attachments, or you know things like that. And my office, I used to have a detached garage and away from the house, and it was like my office in there, and I would have a window that had that frosted glass,
Hmm.
and a lot of times I would be working out there, and the outside of that window was just like a little passageway between the wall and the fence. In other words, it didn't face the street. It was basically to my backyard. Nobody would go in that little passage. It's just like a little brickway that I had built there. And I knew sometimes, even before people were coming in, if I would be working out there in the office, I would see figures go back and forth on the other side of that frosted glass. And to me, it was my heads up that either one, there was a case coming in along those lines, or somebody that I had already booked an appointment with, um, that there was something there. Because a lot of times people have these ideas and it's not what it is.
Hmm.
And that was my first tip off. That, and a lot of times it's really funny because I would see that, let's say, guess what, within an hour or by the morning, I would get a message from this person trying to cancel the appointment, like, hey, I can't make it. And that was very common. I would say, okay, whenever you're ready. Eventually they would come back, but you could tell that whatever was there was working very hard to not have this person come in to see me. In other words, get exposed, because it's a process where basically this is something that's attached within your body and or aura, and that's a whole different thing. That's a real interesting rabbit hole to go down. But
Hmm.
yeah,
Yes, it is.
it's that's what I'm saying. People, a lot of times we're the ones that judge time linear, and now that we're talking about linear time. And I know you have written a lot about cryptids. And sometimes that I've discussed with different people, why sometimes they're not found, and conversations about whether they're interdimensional or they can go between this dimension and the next. And that's why sometimes they're difficult to find, for lack of a better word.
I believe that most cryptids, these beings that are unknown to science.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking like Bigfoot for the most part, though I think there are some indigenous groups throughout the world.
Right.
But Bigfoot, the Mothman, flying humanoid type beings,
Mm-hmm.
uh, non-terrestrial, alien, even UFOs come through a wormhole or portal like
Okay. Mm-hmm.
from another existence, and I think that does happen. When you
Yes.
start talking to people in ufology and cryptozoology, they want to discount that for the most part, because in ufology, the only thing that could come through something like that would be a non-corporal or a hologram like, you know, entity, and I just don't believe it.
No.
I believe that corporeal entities can come through from another reality, through a wormhole from another
Yeah.
universe of some type, and I think that happens a lot more than what people realize. You know, they talk about UFOs. I think UFOs, for the most part, are craft that just don't come through interstellar space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the light of just traveling from planet to planet through space, I think
Yeah.
there's some type of wormhole or interdimensional aspect to it.
Exactly.
So, you know, yeah, that's the thinking I've been involved with, and in fact, with all this that was going on in Chicago the past year and a half,
Yes, Mothman's been seen in
uh,
Chicago. What is up with that?
I I believe that these are interdimensional beings, flesh and
Okay.
blood. You know, not
Mm-hmm.
holograms or
Right.
manifestations. I think these are actual flesh and blood beings that, for whatever reason, have found their way onto our existence.
Now, let's talk about Mothman.
Hmm.
Do you think Mothman is a warning
No,
or a cause of a disaster? You know,
no,
we
I
could.
don't believe in that harbinger theory.
No. Okay. What do
You
you.
know, that all emanated from the Point Pleasant
Point Pleasant, right? Incident.
back
Yeah.
in '67 when the with the bridge collapse, Silver
Mm-hmm.
Bridge collapsed on the 20th of December, where 46 people passed away, and you know, they had these Mothman, flying humanoid sightings for approximately a year before
Right.
that, but there were a lot of other things going on too. There were a lot of UFO activity and paranormal activity as well. But when this happened in a small community like that,
Yeah.
I think people were kind of looking for an excuse or a reason why it happened.
Yeah.
And since someone came and said, "Well, I saw the Mothman above the bridge," so and so, and they just assumed that's what it was. So that's where that harbinger of doom or harbinger portent of doom
Mm-hmm.
disaster theory came up. Uh, you know, John Keel was great. He was a fantastic researcher, but I think he kind of perpetuated that a bit too. And you know, I think some of the other researchers that are involved with the Mothman kind of see this as a harbinger of doom or some type of
Right.
evil incarnate. I don't believe that. I believe these beings are summoned beings. I
Okay.
think the Mothman from Point Pleasant was a summoned being from another reality by a strong spirit presence, most likely a Native American presence in the area.
Okay.
And I think that what's going on in Chicago, and it's just not Chicago, we've got sightings all over the place.
Okay.
I think these are either summoned beings or are coming through for some other reason other than being a malevolent being.
And I guess another theory, and I don't know, not necessarily because I believe it, because really in Mothman, I'm out in left field as far as, you know, just because something is sighted or shows up in a certain place doesn't necessarily, I know what you're saying, equate to bad things happening.
Hmm.
But you know, part of me thinks, you know, are some of these creatures, like you said, let's say from another dimension, do they feed off of negative emotions, agony, human suffering, death, and is this, why they hang out? You know, because maybe they're not just observing; they're there. The, what do you think?
That's a good question. I really don't know. I think human emotion does play a factor in this, but I believe when these things are summoned, they're summoned for a particular reason, like a protection,
Okay,
or actually used for some type of retaliation,
okay,
not necessarily to harm someone, but to kind of scare things off.
okay.
Uh,
Yeah. You know
As
what? That's
far
a
as
very good.
and even though I believe they're flesh and blood, I think they actually do feed. I have had, and I didn't really mention a whole lot of this when I wrote the book, but we had some witnesses who wanted to remain anonymous because actually they were fearful that somebody would come in and harm these things. But they had actually witnessed, according to them, one of these beings actually feeding on fish in northwest Indiana. And this was
Really?
going on, yeah, this was going on about the time that all this was going on in Chicago. So,
What?
they may actually eat flesh,
Right.
uh, you know,
Yeah, not like hang out and like like an
yeah,
organism that needs to feed itself
yeah,
to keep
yeah,
on living.
actually have food that than just food. So,
What?
they were pretty, I tell you, there was two witnesses actually. They were pretty, adamant about it. And, I kind of checked up on them to see who and what they were and what was going on. And, at this point, I believe them. I think they actually saw something. In fact, it was something that they had witnessed on several occasions.
It's very
And since
possible.
me and my team were investigating this, I think they were afraid that people would come in there and either hurt them or drive
Sure.
them away
Sure.
or what. And
It's
that does happen a
understandable.
lot when we get involved in these type of cases.
Yeah. I think that, you know, I'm not going to say everybody, but unfortunately some people when they don't understand something, they're hostile towards it. And by this I don't mean everything that's out there is like, you know, pink unicorns, but still it's like you shouldn't like try to like hunt it down. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
well,
people out there like that.
there's a mentality out there that these things need to be these unexplained beings need to be hunted down and
No,
researched. Well,
no.
I just think another way. I mean, if we happen to come across one of them, fine.
Well,
Um, a lot of people have written a lot of different things about these type of beings over the years. They find one, what they've written over those years is moot. So,
let me ask you: Have
it's
you
over.
have you ever had? Since a lot of people call you or let you know about these sightings, have you ever seen a correlation with sightings of cryptids and sightings of UFOs? Because I've
Oh,
heard of people.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've had a couple, in fact, where witnesses would state that they actually see something coming out of one of these craft
there you go.
or associated with craft and these beings at the same time. That's fairly well documented.
Yes.
And it just doesn't involve UFOs and a cryptid. It also involves paranormal activity and a lot of other odd things that go on. But one thing that we have been looking into recently, as far as in the air, is in Pennsylvania, and I'm quite sure it happens other places as well. But this phenomena of people seeing these orbs in relation to Bigfoot sightings, and actually a day or two later, when an investigator will go out to the location looking for evidence, these orbs will show up. Now,
Wow.
that's something that I haven't really run across a lot of over the many years I've done this, but I'd say the last few years that's becoming more prevalent. Now, why that happens, I don't know. I mean, it just makes you start thinking, maybe there is some type of paranormal or supernatural aspect of
Right.
these cryptids.
Connection.
So, yeah.
And what do you think? And I have to ask because there's the people that say Bigfoot is benign, good, don't worry about it. And then there's the other people that think that we have to worry about Bigfoot because given half a chance, Bigfoot would have you for lunch, if they could get away with it.
Well, I had an encounter in '81,
Oh,
and this thing made no attempt, though I was on the other side of a river.
okay.
Um, but I was in the river fishing at the time, and when I saw this being, it made no indication that it was coming after me
Okay.
or that it was even interested in me. So I think for the most part, it's just like anything else. They try to avoid and other creatures. They try to avoid humans. Uh, I guess if the situation calls for it, say they feel threatened or trapped or something to that effect, they will retaliate, and there have been instances where that's happened.
Right.
Um, I don't think it's much different than any other animal, as for even a human. I mean, a person is threatened, they're going to retaliate. So
Exactly. Yeah, and sometimes it might be that they have young close by, which is what a lot of
exactly.
animals, that's usually when animals that normally passive will get ferocious if they're protecting young.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's very possible. I think I have a friend of mine. She lives like in California, and her husband. He told me this story, and he says, in other words, he says he was up camping in Northern California with his uncle and his dad, and they sent him. There was a lake nearby, and I can't remember if they told him go get some water or go get some more firewood, something like that. He was a kid. I think he was like 10 or 11. And he said that he was just there hanging out, and all of a sudden, I guess, there's a clearing right by the lake, and all of a sudden he saw Bigfoot step out from the tree line. I guess it checked out to see if anybody was there, but they didn't see him because he was kind of off in the shadows. He says he saw this thing stroll over, drink water, and then go back in. And he says that he was like, he said he didn't move, not because he didn't want him to notice, is that he says he couldn't move. That's how
Mm.
wigged out he was. He was like, and he says he
Yeah,
went
that
back to
that does
camp, and his
happen.
uncle and his dad were like, "What's wrong with you?" And he was like, he couldn't talk, and finally he got it out. And he says that they were looking at him like, your imagination's running away with you, or something like that. And he says he never forgot that. He says as a kid he never ever forgot that. And I think a lot of people have those experiences, almost like, you're not hunting for Bigfoot. You're just out there. You're a kid going on a camping trip, and the next thing you know, you have a sighting, just like what you described when you were having a fishing trip.
It's it happens a lot. I've talked to many witnesses who would be out hunting and be armed, and they'd come face to face with one of these things and just not take a shot at it. Not only because they were paralyzed in fear or paralyzed in shock, it's just that they had doubts that if they took a shot at it, it would do much good. And it was that trepidation. And yeah, I mean, you don't hear too much about people taking shots at these things.
Well, um, I think that I, sometimes I fall into the part of me wants to think that I'm kind of on the fence of them being able to travel between this dimension and another.
Hmm.
I just think sometimes that they're just really, really, really good at camouflaging themselves.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
you said that that sighting was up in the Pacific Northwest,
yes,
and I believe that area in particular
yes,
have indigenous beings. I think those, and different parts of the country and the world, they've all got different types of hairy hominids. I mean, they had distinctive features. Let's say like the skunk apes down in Florida, up into around the Gulf Coast. I think those are indigenous for the most part. Eastern Texas, Arkansas, I think are indigenous. Much of what you see in Canada, mid Canada, west out in the British Columbia, and down into the Pacific Northwest, I definitely believe those are indigenous. But there are other parts of the country, in particularly where I'm at, the East Coast and the Midwest, upper Midwest in particular. I believe a lot of these may be, for the most part, beings from other dimensions. And why they do that, I don't know. Is there a relationship to extraterrestrials or non-terrestrials? Possibly. But are there time slips as well, or are there alternate universes crossing?
Yes.
Very possible. I mean, the more evidence, it does seem like as time goes by and in recent years that the veil is thinning for the most part, and I think people are seeing and experiencing a lot of this phenomena, not only because it's more prevalent on TV and being written about, people are more open about it. I just believe that there's more opportunity given to people, not just out in the boondocks somewhere, but it happens in places closer to towns and cities as well. I think I think there's just more out there.
Well, you know what? Because it's really funny because in the last few years, I always thought of Bigfoot as just one Bigfoot. Like there's one Bigfoot. And of course, yeah, in Florida we have the skunk ape, but that was, But now it turns out that there's different versions. The grassman, and
Yeah.
depending on like you said, what part of the country are you in, depends on the type, what version of Bigfoot you're gonna get. Size varies. A lot of things vary. Um, and that's, like I said, I want to. Part of me is like, I think they're better than I think people realize. I think a lot of times people are being observed by them and they have no idea they're not. Because
Oh,
I think they're
absolutely.
so proficient at camouflaging, um, that people just don't realize that they're around.
Yeah, I believe that. I know there are particular areas where I know they're at, and people just don't realize they're there. And the evidence is there, but you just don't see them. They're around.
Yeah, they but there's a lot of getting. And the thing is that there's also, and I tell everybody, as far as, I don't know if you ever see the that series. They only ran it for a few seasons. It was called Fringe, and basically it dealt, with
Yeah,
the idea of a
I was a big
parallel
fan of Fringe. Yeah.
dimension or parallel universe. And I think that the laws of physics are proving that a lot of what used to be considered before way out science fiction falls more and more into the realm of reality. We might not understand exactly how it would work, but it's not that far out as it once used to be when you talked about things like that.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are going on that we just don't know about too. For whatever reason, it seems governments and other official agencies believe that they ought to protect everybody from knowing what's going on for whatever reason. I
Yeah.
think a lot of this stuff gets suppressed
Yes.
because of that sometimes. I'm not a
Yes.
conspiracy theorist to the point where I think everything it needs to be disclosed, and there's a lot of
Oh,
things
sure.
out there that we should know and that it'll cause worldwide panic. But I'm quite sure there are some things we don't know about.
I want to say that I think we know a lot. Depending on, like you said, I do believe that a lot of information has not been given out, always with the excuse of, oh, we don't want rioting or whatever. People to
Yeah.
go like, it's like, okay, I understand that part, but I think there's a lot that they don't know, and I think part of it is like that if they ever came out and said, well, yes, we've had contact or whatever the admission ends up being, of course they're going to get blasted with questions. And I think, despite all they know, sometimes there's going to be the answer we don't know. And I think people are going to wig out with that too. But I think that, yeah, there's the people that their reality should just, that's it. They're not going to be good with it. But I think the majority of people, like I tell everybody, I think that most people will like have like a 24-hour little meltdown, have a drink, sit down, think about it, and then go back and say, okay, tell me what it is.
Yeah.
I really don't think that you're gonna have rioting on the streets of just people like not being able to function. Maybe for the first 24 hours, but then after that, it'll be like, let's hear what you got.
Well, I don't want to get people rattled or kind of perpetuate fear or anything, but I know the powers to be do suppress a lot of this. And in fact, I know it for a fact because over the years when I've done this, I've been approached 3 times by government officials for certain investigations or theories and such. And I know others who have had happened to them as well. So,
Yeah.
it's never one of those things. Well, you keep your mouth shut, we'll put a bullet in your head. But it's more like,
Yeah.
a general reminder that, we'd like you not to do so and so or associate with so and so.
Right.
And I know in one instance it was because for my protection because of somebody who they felt was causing a problem that may expand into more problems. But yeah, they do keep their eye out. I mean, they
Right.
realize what's going on. Of course, with me being on the blog every day and doing shows like this and everything else and writing,
Right.
I'm pretty sure I got a big eye on me sometimes. So
Right. And
it's
that, and you know
you
what?
think about that.
And it's, yeah, I'm laughing. You know why, Lon? Because when you look at, you remember when the X Files first came out in the 90s,
Mhm.
where it was, oh man, what a great show, and it was like that big brother was supervising everything, and a lot of people thought, man, what a great show. And people I don't think realized just how accurate that is, or that was, those shows when they were coming out, as far
Yeah, it's
as,
it's funny. I've thought for years that maybe the government or the entertainment world was trying to spoon feed us as far as
yeah,
what's really going on, like In Search of and
I remember that
shows
show.
like that, and X Files and such. And then, of course, today we get Monsters and Mysteries in America and
Mm-hmm.
paranormal this and that, and you do wonder sometimes how much those powers to be are involved with that. I don't think to an extent that some people may think they are, but I think in big entertainment, when like movies and such, I think there's some input there.
Yeah, I
Um,
think so.
but entertainment is all well and good. Sometimes it'll kind of take you to a level that is just unbelievably not going to happen. But
Well,
in my case, you do occasionally fall down the rabbit hole,
well,
and we go from there.
the thing is this, that sometimes it's almost like what you said. Let's give you the plain truth, but we'll dress it up sometimes with stuff that's so outlandish that you think the whole thing is outlandish.
Oh yeah,
So, it's like, yeah, man, that was a great movie fantasy. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? Part of it is actually true. We just kind of dressed it up a lot. So that's really unbelievable. And
yeah,
we're
I
letting
think
you know
that's
about
true.
it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Part of whether you want to think of acclimating people, uh, it's, I don't know, and sometimes it's really surprising because, and the reason why I had bought, that, that sometimes, a lot of the conspiracy theories that surround this are people that have come out after many, many years of working in some, department for the government, and either one, whether retired and or close to dying, like, well, what are you going to do to me now? you know
Yeah, yeah.
and if you
You
said,
you
well, it was one
sometimes wonder.
person, but a lot of them have done that.
Yeah, you sometimes wonder how much of that is really factual. You wonder, well, maybe somebody just wants to have a legacy,
Yeah.
and they'll come out and say something, and then it's there for posterity. Uh, I usually take all that with a grain of salt. When I do my work, I want it to be based on. I mean, I want the conclusions I come up to be based on my research.
Sure.
Of course, I look into what other people do, and I take it in consideration as well. But it's one of those things where you do have to have an open mind. It's funny. I tell the people who will call me to come and help them or to do a remote work with them. The
Right.
first thing I tell them is, look, the only thing I require you to do is to be open-minded. You may think that some of what I'm telling you sounds crazy, but when I tell you this and when I ask you to do something, it needs to be done. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you something that I don't believe in. You
Right.
got to be open-minded about it and consider what I'm telling you. And and that's the caveat every time I work with someone.
Exactly. Because, and it's surprising, I'm sure, even when you have people that are having weird stuff happening to them, but then you ask them to do certain things and then they balk at it. And it's like, wait a minute, you've got some really weird stuff going on and you're still questioning, especially
Yeah,
somebody that's got experience in this, like when you ask them to do or not do certain things.
it happens. It
Yes.
happens, and I guess people are predisposed to not believing in something they can't see or something they've been told all their life isn't real. But you do have to keep an open mind, and if something like that is happening to you, I would think that you'd start considering the possibilities.
Of course. Of course. That's what it's all about. And I think that a lot of people like yourself usually get that call at the 11th hour when they've
Mhm.
exhausted all other possibilities. And let me ask you, have you run across people that once you really start to talk to them, they kind of fess up that they've been having experiences for years and they've done either one of two things. If it wasn't severe enough, they ignored it. And if it really got that bad, they would just move. And it's like, you've been dragging this along with you for how long? You know? And they still kind of in
Yeah,
denial about it.
I rarely get calls on activity that are fleeting or something that just started.
Mm hmm.
It's usually activity that's been going on for a good deal of time, and after they've called in other people or you know or just dealt with it to a point where they couldn't take it anymore. Hey, I tell you, and that's one thing that upsets me more than anything else are these paranormal wannabes that just want to go out in the graveyard and start taking EVPs,
Yeah, all right.
and something grabs onto them and they bring it home,
Yes, sirree,
and then all
Bob.
then all hell breaks loose. And it's funny. I'll tell people about that, about cases where I've run into that, and they'll just think I'm absolutely crazy.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And I've told other people that do this type, that are so-called paranormal researchers or investigators who just love to go out into the graveyard, to go out there and look at the gravestones and start yelling out the spirits and trying to get EVPs recorded.
Or God forbid, provoking.
Yeah, I mean you're opening up a whole new can of worms because
Yes.
you just never know what you're going to run into out there. I mean,
Ooh.
people talk about haunted graveyards. Well, there's some badass entities out there,
Uh huh.
and they have no qualms about attaching themselves to you.
Yep. Absolutely. And I tell everybody, I said, you're lucky if you walk out with a human entity because there's some graveyards that have what they call sentinel spirits that are non human.
Hmm.
Okay. And if you get the attention of one of those, oh crap. Good luck to you.
I
Oh,
have, I have problem going to funerals. And it's not because
no,
of,
no, 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 no. It I think it has a lot to do with the intent and a lot of these sentinels that sometimes are placed or invoked or I mean it could have been anything. Summoned if you want to. They're basically there almost as in other words, they don't have a moral compass like we do, good, bad,
Mhm.
evil. They just,
Yeah,
if you're trying to relate to them like as another human being, it's not gonna work. That's why you're in so much trouble if one of them attaches to you. But you
yeah,
know, you're not doing anything wrong. You're not gonna have a problem. It's when you start doing stupid stuff.
well, in my case, it's like, now it's not usually not bad in a funeral home itself, but it's when you go out to the cemetery and you're getting bombarded by these energies,
Oh,
because
sure.
it's not that I can see these things, but you get these what I call astrals.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to get your attention no matter what's going on.
Yes.
And
Especially.
I've been to a quite a bit of funerals the last couple of years, and it seems like every time I'm out there in the cemetery, because I very rarely go to a cemetery other than a ceremony,
Mm-hmm.
and it's tough sometimes. It really is. It's distracting, and I protect myself the best I can, just hoping nothing's going to attach to me. But they are drawn to you.
Oh, yes. Yes, they are. And I'm gonna give you, for instance, and a lot and like one time, I remember I had a dream, and it was like, and it was a real short dream, but very not weird in the sense of, and it was like I was like in one of these modern graveyards, like, and there was a bunch of people like walking around, which later on I realized were dead people. Nobody paying
Hmm.
attention to the other, and I had this one guy come up to me, and goes, "Oh, hey, when you come out here," and I was like, "What is this about?" Okay, it was like a really short dream, but very vivid. I can't remember if it was the next day or the day after that. I had a friend of mine call me up and ask me if I would accompany him to a burial. In other words, I had no idea. That wigged me out. It was like, what? In other words, they know ahead of time that I had no inkling whatsoever at the time that I had that dream that within 24, 48 hours, I can't remember, I would be going to the graveyard for, to be with a person that needed to attend a burial. I was like,
Hmm.
okay. So sometimes they reach out to people in a lot of different ways, but I think as far as negative stuff, and a lot of people say, well, you know why would there be ghosts in a cemetery? And I go, because sometimes if you have a discarnate spirit that is kind of confused, they follow their body around. Where's the last place it went to? In this, let's say, one of these cases, it gets buried. Go, so they hang out at the cemetery, like, okay, now what? What do I do? And that's another whole conversation as to why they're not, going on with where they're supposed to go. Whether they're confused, they don't know they're dead, they're scared they're going to burn in hell, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it could be a million reasons. And a lot of them, believe it or not, just hang out in the cemetery, and then you get a lot of other things that people don't realize also, that a lot of people use cemeteries to either dump ceremonial objects
Hmm.
or summon, which have involve dead spirits. I mean, well, no, obviously, it's dead, but what I'm saying, spirits that they've used in the ceremonies or the rituals. In other words, they don't want this thing at their house, so they dump this stuff in or around cemeteries. A lot of times, if you look especially in the perimeters or in the corners of the cemetery. So you get a lot of stuff out there that is not necessarily anybody that was buried there. It's just because it's a lot of whether it's the dirt or in some cases bones, are very useful in a lot of, depending on what type of magic you're practicing, in some type of ritual work. And they dump a lot of the tools or whatever it is after the fact in there. So, and then like you said, you go in there and you're like, oh, I'm going to get myself some evidence. Yeah, you're going to get that a lot more too.
Yeah, you're going to get more than you expect. Um, these energies that hang around cemeteries where their bodies were buried at are normally earthbounds that just don't even realize they're dead,
Mm-hmm.
and they can cause the most problems. When you get some an earthbound in a home or residence where that where it's got that intelligence enough to think that it's not dead, and they're
Yeah.
confused, and That's where you're going to get most of your problems at. And of course, when somebody in life is bad or they've got issues, uh, they're the same when they pass. I mean,
Sure.
that life force moves on, but
Yes.
there's still a residual left there. And you know, uh, like I was saying, if this happens in a cemetery or someplace where bodies are buried or even disposed of, I've heard of crematories that have
Yes.
had so many problems.
Yeah.
But it's going to, if you go in there looking for problems, I mean, or looking for something, you're going to find something. And yeah, I think some of the worst hauntings that I have not only been experienced, have worked with, but I've talked to people. When you start digging into it and you start figuring out what happened, it's a result of somebody going into some place where they really shouldn't be starting, asking for EVPs and such, and they get attached. So
Right.
you put the warning out there, but people invariably are going to do it anyway. So
Well, I think that, um, and it's like, thank you, reality shows, even though they, of course, they give a lot of disclaimers. Don't do this. Don't do that. There's always the people that are gonna go. Well, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna. And it's like, yeah, okay. And you know what? You might go out there and think it's really boring and nothing happens until a couple of days later at your house, stuff starts happening. And sometimes it takes them a while. And then when you go back to point of origin was that visit to the cemetery or whatever. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like,
when all these shows started coming on television, I was hooked on too because it was something new and it was something that I did. But when you start watching that stuff and start really digging in and start realizing what's really going on, a lot of people don't realize, you go to a house for an investigation, you're not always going to see or hear or experience
exactly.
activity. It's not like it is on television. But I'm almost at the point now where I just don't even watch those shows anymore. There may be just one show I will watch, and that'll be it. And you know, it's I know if in overall it's not a bad thing. Just like the shows that talk about cryptids, Bigfoot, and whatever, or some of the other strange things that happen. I think it's opened people's thoughts to these things that may possibly be there, and it has helped in our research to a degree. But I think some of the information that's given out in those type of shows isn't always that good,
No.
and it can turn out to be problems. Look, I've been involved with TV shows myself, so I understand it. It's
Oh
all
no.
about
Yeah.
entertainment. It's all the usually the good stuff that's supposed to be in there doesn't get put in, gets cut out. Um, I'm possibly going to be involved in a TV series in the near future, and so I know how all that is. It's just I guess you got to take the good and the bad
Yeah.
and go with it. But yeah, it's not like it seems on TV. Believe me.
Exactly. But that's the thing that um some of the things people, I think the problem comes in when people take everything as like, I'm gonna go and do it. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know what? It might sound like it's like really great fun, but spiritually speaking, sometimes you do run a really big risk if you don't know what you're doing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
It's just like anything else in life. There's always a risk to it, and
yep.
it's just how prepared you are and how much you're willing to put into it for what you want to get out of it. And
Yeah, but
I've had people, I've had people literally come to my house who want to start some type of paranormal group, and they'll come in here and we'll talk about it, and I'll tell them what I think the dangers are and this and that. And I know of at least 3 of those groups that just never got off the ground because they were afraid to go in the place.
Yeah.
It just never happened. It's not like I wanted to talk them out of it, but I just wanted to make them aware of what the problems they could face, and their responsibility when they go into somebody's house, their responsibility towards the homeowner, and the
Yes.
responsibility towards the spirits.
Yes.
You just don't go and start screaming and threatening entities,
Hmm.
because that's when hell can really break loose.
Exactly. And I think that you make a very good point that a lot of groups sometimes, because I tell them, if most groups, if they get together by year 1 or 2 the most, that's it, they've dissolved, they've things, everybody, is that if you tell somebody, especially, well, it depends also on their level of knowledge, but if you tell somebody, well, you wanted to start, either one, the advice I've given is find a good solid group to join, and figure out if you like it. You might not like it, you might think it's boring. Or if, let's say, you're ready to go on and start a group, that you give somebody basically, well, you know what, before you start a group, you need to study more, as in study, as in like get more informed, whether
Hmm.
it's protection, whether it's what if you go out to somebody's house and you've got somebody that's mentally ill. It
Hmm.
happens, you know,
Oh, it does happen. Yeah.
like where you need to like back out very graciously and go, okay, if there's anything going on in there or not, well, guess what, my safety, the safety of my team is paramount, and this person is doesn't have all oars in the water. You know, there's a lot of things that people don't realize are involved in when you either part leader or put together a paranormal team. You know, uh, and then some of them they find out after the fact, and usually, that's when they run into a lot of problems of just regular stuff. As far as either spiritually, they have what they call it, beginner's luck. They go out there and they run into something really dark and malevolent right out
Yeah.
the gate. And then what do you do? You
Yeah.
know?
I
Um,
always suggest that, when you start a group up, to have at least one member who's got some real experience
yes.
and has some intuitive or psychic ability.
Yes.
And if it's somebody that can't be with you all the time, then have somebody you can refer to in case you run into a situation where you've either got questions that need answered, or that the client is going to need actual help to have it removed, because there's just too many times when a
Yes.
paranormal group will go into a home, bring the cameras out, the uh, the recording equipment and everything else, gather evidence, and leave the owner hanging. And
Yes.
that probably upsets me more than anything.
Yes.
I've had so many people who have had experiences like that, where they believe that these groups are gonna, they give them a good story and say we're gonna do this and that, and all they're there is to gather evidence so they can put it up on the blog somewhere. And then and because of their actions, things start getting worse, and it's
Yes.
almost like a vicious cycle, and it just steadily picks up and picks up. And that's where, when these hauntings get really bad, and that's when, if it's a situation where it's just knocks and stuff, or light phenomena going on,
Yes.
that's when it tends to increase to the point where there are attachments, oppression, and sometimes actual possession. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's nice to go out and gather evidence, but
But yeah.
have an objective with it as well.
Right. Exactly. It's like sometimes you always have to think it's not that common, but what if you do run around across something very, very serious? And then what do? Like you said, you need at least somebody there that, at the very least, can tell them, hey, you know what? This might be this, and we're going to get you the help that you need, because we don't think that we're equipped to handle it. Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that if you're a
No,
paranormal group. admitting
No.
that you might be out of your depth in something instead of going in there and running around and making it 10 times worse by the time you leave.
Yeah, I've seen, like I said, I've seen it happen. Um, the worst case scenario is when you get called into a situation, or say a group will get called into a situation involving a shadow figure
Oh.
or an entity that is just not going to leave unless
Mm-hmm.
the underlying cause of it is taken care of. These shadow beings are almost like, one of them will walk down the street and they're going by house, and they pick the one where the most dysfunction, or there's
Yes.
problems, or somebody's deathly ill or something, and it's almost like a magnet, and they go right in there. And when they do get there, they're there for one reason, and that's to gather energy from whoever or
Yes.
whatever is there. And these are
Mm-hmm.
killers.
Yeah.
These entities are killers.
Mm-hmm.
And people talk about, when I wake up and I see the shadow staying by the bed, what is that? Well, that's something you don't want there. So, if you're going to call somebody in there, you better call somebody in there and give you the facts. Not that they necessarily can get rid of it, but they can tell you how to get rid of it and give you the right direction that you
Right.
need. Calling a bunch of ghost hunters in there ain't going to do it.
And you know what? And I've mentioned this before on in my experience, again, people, whether it's because of the shows or movies or whatever, sometimes they think that, let's say they get a paranormal group that goes in there and it's a clap of thunder, poop, whatever it is gone. But
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, there's always like something left over where that family or whoever lives there have got to do consistently for maybe weeks, months, maybe even a year, depending on what was there. Some type of, whether it's putting holy water in their house or salting their grounds, or in other words, there's something that they have to do on their own once that person was there that did the hard work to keep it clear, because it's almost like there's always like that leftover residual stuff, especially if there was any type of dysfunction or just problems in the household, where people have to keep making sure that things stay clear.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, exactly that example that you used of the shadow person is like, okay, let me go, and the attraction is to, where am I going to find not a one day, you know, human thing, but a systematic or long drawn out dysfunction, ugly things, abuse, God knows, within a household. Yeah, that's the place I want to be. And of course, once they're in there, then everything just triples over as far as fury and darkness. And then that's, when you have people starting, have their sightings, or that they'll even realize themselves, man, things were bad, but all of a sudden it really, really got bad after this. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because you were getting a little bit of extra help.
Yeah, it's those type of entities. I mean, even poltergeist. I mean, poltergeist aren't these malevolent entities that are there for, just because they're there. I mean, these are manifested by someone, a living person who is actually subconsciously doing this.
Right.
And these things just don't go away on their own. You can bring anybody you want in there to try to move it out, but it always comes down to the person who's doing the actual manifestation. And they've got to be drawn down to the point where they realize what they're doing, why it's happening, and to stop whatever it is they are doing from causing it. And those type of cases are, and they're very similar in a way to the shadow person, because when you alleviate what's feeding it,
Yeah,
or what's manifesting it, it's that's the only way you can get rid of it. And
exactly.
yeah, a lot of people just don't realize. That's another thing I hate hearing. They're talking about poltergeist. Poltergeist this, poltergeist that. Well, I mean, it's just not something that's stealing your keys or knocking on the door, or moving chairs around. It's entirely different. And you know, like, again, here's Hollywood kind of putting the
Yeah.
moniker out there that everybody uses. And I mean, these are specific phenomena that got to be dealt with in specific manners, and you know that's why it pays to have someone who has a little knowledge of what's going on, and just not coming in there to gather evidence.
Yes. And I've mentioned that before. I say it goes both ways. I tell people if you're having a problem like that and you're coming down to the conclusion that you think you need a paranormal team to come in there and tell you, first of all, if you're on the money or if it's something else, do your research. Don't do your research, because basically you're opening up your doors to strangers.
Hmm.
And first of all, you want somebody that's going to be trustworthy, that you let them in their front door. That's to begin with. And then, hopefully that they know what they're doing. I said the first thing you look at is how long have they been together. And, you know, when you speak to that person, I say, if you ever talk to a team member and they just don't give you the right vibes, go on and look for somebody else. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think about where you live at and all the crazy things that happen down in your area, like Santeria in
Oh, yes.
particular. I mean, I don't know how much of that you run across, but now I've never been involved with one of those cases, and I don't know if I really want to be honest with you, but I can imagine what's involved with doing that. Uh, can you kind of explain to me what you would encounter when you got into one of those cases where they've got these altars and such?
Right. Well, and this is the thing, a lot of times, um, these religions, they work a lot with discarnate spirits,
Hmm.
either for purposes of divination, or in the case of like what you described before, putting a curse on somebody. The curse is not a curse as and we think is like, oh, I hope a piano falls on your head. The curse
Right.
is to send over a discarnate spirit and start getting haunted by this spirit who basically they manipulate or they've found. And a lot of people, everybody's familiar with, that they sacrifice animals starting with a chicken, goat, whatever, all the way.
Uh-huh.
And personally, and again, freedom of religion, everybody practice. My own experience and what I've seen, any ceremony where you have to shed blood, yes, not good.
Yeah.
Because normally any type of spirit, okay, that requires or wants blood, even if it's an animal, and they do a lot of work with, let's say that you think that you were hexed, an example, or bad luck or bad health or whatever. It doesn't even have to be something that somebody did to you, just where basically they use, let's say, a chicken to cleanse you, okay? And if you say, well, they did something with a chicken and then, hey, chicken, like, in other words, the chicken becomes a scapegoat kind of deal.
Hmm.
The chicken go, but the thing is, the chicken is killed, the chicken is sacrificed. And the more severe the problem is, then that's when, or a dove, then that's when your animal goes up. It's like, then all of a sudden hey, that problem's really big. The chicken ain't gonna cut it. And I hate to say it, but you go to the majority of cemeteries, not all of them, but a good portion of them, and if you look in the perimeters, you will find sometimes parts of dead animals.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that adds an extra weird layer. But eventually it falls into the same premise of whether you're talking human entities or non-human. You're going to treat them the same. You know,
Right. Right.
It's just a different way of invoking them or summoning them or using them, whatever the case might be. Yeah, I've seen a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I bet you have. I've when I do a session for people, I will occasionally involve divination or possibly some root conjuring.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot of that over the years, and use a lot of incense, you burn a lot of herbs, you do a lot of this, you do a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing these things. It all comes down to belief for the most part, and I'm pretty sure that has a lot to do with what you have run across with Santeria. But when it comes down to sacrifice, that's a different animal.
Well,
There.
and this is the thing, because there's a lot of psychics that will tell you they have a control. I know that that term's not used that often anymore, but a lot of the mediums will say that they had a control on the other side, which was usually a spirit that would basically act like as a gatekeeper, especially if they were channeling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I've
What
heard
I'm talking
channelers
about
say that.
is where they'll be, because I've seen it, they've done it in front of me, where they will get possessed. Unusually. I mean, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
They will get possessed. In other words, when they're doing the divination, they are the one that's doing the divination is not the person you went to see. According to them, they've been possessed by this spirit, which is the spirit that basically aids them in divination. It's not like the spirit's whispering in their ear about it. Okay? It's that they've allowed possession in order to have that ability to. I mean, I don't have any problem at all with divination. I think that at some point, a lot of us, when we were more attentive to our intuition, we were pretty good at it. I think my problem personally is when you allow an entity to consistently take you over in order for you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And because 9 times out of 10, this spirit is not an evolved spirit. This is sometimes a bound spirit, and there's a lot of dark aspects. I mean, things that have happened, the sacrifices of people that have found sites deep in the woods out here, of a lot of animal sacrifice. And we're talking here really, really, really dark stuff. Really dark stuff. And, by the way, if you really wanted to do somebody in, like, on a dark magic, you would go to one of these priests who works the dark magic. It's really expensive too. But of course, you're paying for, hey, I either one, want this guy to fall off a building, or two, I want to ruin him financially, or I want to, like, make his personal life just fall apart. Stuff like that you're going to pay thousands of dollars for. And you'd be surprised that people actually fork over that money to have that type of work done.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do have repercussions. As a matter of fact, less than a year ago, I went on an investigation, and I went in on the second part of it. And this lady, she was renting a very nice house, a lot of land. She was renting it. Basically, what we came up to, she was having a lot of experiences in the house, whatever. But basically, the origin of it, we determined, was that whoever owned or had owned the house had a curse placed on the land. Somebody had buried something in their yard. How's that?
Yeah.
In other words, the person wanted to get at the owner of the property and had buried something in their yard that was really maleficent. And I said, it's not really directed at you, but because you live here, you are suffering the effects of it. At the end of the day, we kind of gave her the advice, and we said, look, since you don't own the place, if our best advice to you would be, once your lease is up, move. Go move. And about 3 or 4 months later, not even something, I know her lease was coming up. I got a call from one of the other investigators that she had. She goes, hey, she wants to know if you can go back out because she renewed her lease and something had happened with one of her kids. Her house had gotten broken into. She had these beautiful antiques, but nobody would know. It was really unusual stuff, and I was like, what am I going to tell? We told her, something here is happening with the land, and as long as you live there, even if it's not at you, you're going to suffer the consequences of it. So sometimes people, they put themselves in the fixes, and even when they have the chance to extricate themselves out of it. But yeah, Stuff like that
Mm.
here is more common than you think. And by the way, these people were Australian.
Mm.
They had the ones that were the family that was living there. They had been living in South Florida for a while, but they were Australian, and they were like, huh? And I told them, yeah, this is what's going on. They were kind of a little bit familiar with it, but I think they really truly did not. I mean, they understood the experiences they were having. They knew that was real, but they weren't quite sure about the explanation that was given to them. And
Hmm.
yep. And I said, there's no way for nobody to fix that. We already told this person this is what you need to do. It's ultimately their choice, you know.
Right. Mm.
But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that go on here all the
Yeah.
time.
I had one case that was really weird like that, where it was the land itself, but it was because somebody who had lived there before had upset somebody or whatever. We never did really figure out exactly what was going on. But anyway, this woman in Connecticut had contacted me and another person I was working with who lived up there, and she was having all kinds of crazy things going on in the house. But it was spilling out into the yard, and there was a creek down below on the other side of the road. People were seeing all kinds of stuff out there as well. Well, anyway, uh, we did some sessions. We did some RV sessions, and I kept getting this sense that something was in the yard. Didn't know what it was. I didn't know what, it was out in the boonies. I didn't know if somebody had cursed the yard or whatever it was. Well, anyway, hoping that whatever somebody had buried in the yard was metal, so had somebody take metal detectors out there. And lo and behold, they pulled up 4 pesos buried in each corner of the yard of the property that somebody had buried there, most likely cursed. And
Really?
we took them out, disposed of them, and the problem stopped right away. So I don't know exactly why it was cursed or who had done whatever there, but that's probably the only case that I've been involved with where, it involved that or a talisman or something being buried on a property. But yeah, these kind of things do happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. This is anybody that becomes familiar with ritual or magical work or anything like that, or anybody that's into cursing or hexing or blah blah blah. A lot of people think that sometimes it's like something very obvious. Like, yeah, and a lot of times they do what basically is the hidden, which is where they basically go at you through the land where you live at.
mhm,
Okay, and it slowly works its way into your life, as in, if that's the intent, in other words.
mhm,
And a lot of times that thing of burying whatever it was, that ritual item,
mhm.
is that it's the slow dismantling of this person. It's almost the equivalent of, hey, I don't want to shoot you and get it over with real quick. I want to see you suffer. That's how I'm going to enjoy, when people get this weird, crazy stuff that they want to get it back at somebody for whatever reason. They want to do the long, drawn out suffering deal. But yeah, there's a lot of, that's why the people got to be careful. And I'm sure you run across it where people, even whatever it is not really part of the house. It's the land itself where the problem
Yeah.
originates in.
Well,
So
I've always thought that what goes around comes around, and when you
yes,
start playing with stuff like that, and you start putting curses out, it's going to come back to you as well. And just like, and you were talking about channeling. I've always been afraid of channeling. I've never really wanted to be involved with anything like that. But I was involved with a case. Now, this was a remote case, but we were doing it online and we had cameras and stuff set up, so I could see on my computer what was going on.
okay,
So the person I was working with, this happened in a town by the name of Conneffley in southern Wales,
okay,
and this person started channeling in the living room of this home, and I don't know. I don't know if she knew what she was getting herself into, but after she was done, I mean, she was literally possessed.
There you
And
go.
she was talking all this language, and
Uh-huh.
I mean, it wasn't her voice or anything. I mean, I had never been involved with anything like that before, and I'm quite sure I'm never going to get involved with anything like that again. But you know, from what I understand, she didn't work on a property for a couple of years after that. It affected
Yes.
her that bad,
Yep.
and yeah, I'm not thrilled about channeling. You
Me
know, I know
too.
some people can do it. You know, I've heard a fair number of psychics that talk about being jumped
Yes.
and all the problems it causes when that happens. I mean, it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned, though, you know, in channeling, you're just letting it happen to you. And I
Yes.
don't see where there is a control there. You know, it can, you know, you said that
Well,
these channelers have somebody on
some
the other side. Yeah.
and even then, that this is the thing. The supposedly the control is like the gatekeeper. In other words, they would not let a spirit through that wanted to do what you described, which is,
Right.
oh, I've got a body. I'm not leaving. Thanks. You
Yeah.
know, in other words, they would only let a spirit through. But again, whenever you are dealing with a discarnate that would love nothing better than to have a human body and have what they would, which is what they want the most, but that they don't have anymore. They're
Yeah.
self-aware, but they don't got no human
Exactly.
body to go with it. Let me tell you something. That is something really difficult to leave, and that's where a lot of sometimes the mediums, they run into big, huge problems because
Yeah.
that spirit wants in, and then a lot of people don't realize that sometimes there's different levels. You know, everybody thinks of possession as possession, and there's a lot of layers of attachments, and you could have either obsession or oppression, which is not outright possession, but where they flip in and out, and that's where you have people sometimes that will, especially if you know if they either drink too much or you know or they do drugs, or not all the time, but sometimes where they'll tell you, I did this and I don't remember it.
Yeah. You know, oppression cases, in as far as I'm concerned, are probably some of the hardest ones to take to deal with because it's almost like it's flighty. I mean, this thing you'll be fine one minute and the next minute it's like, you know, it's crazy, and you
Yes.
really it's hard to get a read on an oppression.
Yes.
These entities, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they seem to, and it's usually more than one entity
Yes, of
from what
course.
I've found.
Yes.
And they're moving around everywhere, and it's hard to get a read on, hard to, you know, to do much with it. It
Mm-hmm.
requires a lot of work by the person who's actually oppressed, and a lot of times, you know, I don't want to say the impression that the person is weak-minded for the most part, but it does seem to happen to a lot of people who have no grasp of what's really happening,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, they just make the perfect foil, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're tough. They are really tough.
Yeah. Well, this is, and you know, because my hypnotherapy practice, I dealt with a lot of that.
Hmm.
And I tell everybody, if you got that attachment with through either physical or emotional trauma, the earlier in life you form that attachment, the more difficult it is for you to realize that it's not you, part of you. In
Hmm.
other words,
Hmm.
it's, you know, sometimes if it's later in life, you kind of recognize what's going on. You know, either are these thoughts or whatever. That's not me. You know, something's going on. Wait, but usually if you're very young when it happens, as a child especially, you have a really really tough time realizing that that is not you, and some of your behavior. And by the way, this is not an excuse for people that do stupid stuff or stuff that they shouldn't. But yeah, sometimes, and this is, a lot of people think, well, all attachments are negative. Some start out as negative because what attached to you was negative, but sometimes if you get an attachment from even a relative or somebody that's known, in other words, that wasn't necessarily a bad person, eventually it will because there's nothing worse than you have a human soul trapped
Boy, I'll tell
within the
you.
aura of another person that eventually wants out. Okay, or they want you to do things their way, or whatever.
I had a particular case like that. Oh my God, it was a woman up in Prince Edward Island.
Uh
She
huh.
lived in Charlottetown or Charlottesville, Charlottetown. And make a long story short, she was actually oppressed by her dead father,
Yes. Yes.
and he was
Yes.
a nice guy in life,
Mm-hmm.
though it later turned out that he was molesting the daughter, and we didn't even really know about that at first.
Bingo. Yep. I've run
And
across that so many times. It's incredible.
when
Yes.
he passed away, he latched on to her,
Mm-hmm.
and man, this energy just went rotten.
Yes.
And I was attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I had bruised ribs.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm 1,500 miles away, and I've got bruised ribs because of this thing.
Yes.
The person I was working with had to take me out of the situation during the remote view. She
Okay.
was the monitor and had to pull me out of that quickly
Okay.
to keep me from getting hurt any worse than I was. It was a really tough case. And eventually, we were able to work it to the point where we could get her, her strong enough to help fend this thing off, and then, it eventually faded off. But yeah, that was a crazy case. And you're right. When you're talking about a relative
Well,
actually oppressing or possessing a living human, I mean, those get really, really rough sometimes.
sometimes you have something called nesting.
Hmm.
Okay, which is if he had something that he carried with him
Hmm.
in life when he died, he still got that entity nesting within him, whether it's another human being or a non-human being, maybe that caused him to do what he did when he was alive. So basically, like I say, you got two for the price of one.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's when you go in there and all of a sudden what you're describing happens to you. You're like, man, what the hell happened here?
Hmm.
What? And it's because basically you might be dealing with what you think may be one entity, and it might be one entity with its own attachment that it had while it was alive and still carries it with it. And it's almost like a
Yeah.
layered kind of thing, which might have caused him a lot of problems and things that he did when he was alive. And then, it perpetuates itself.
Well, it actually took us to the point where right before I got attacked, when I realized it was actually him. I mean, I didn't
Really?
even know it was the father, and until I was actually being attacked, and I realized that's who it was. And then after that happened, and we started dealing with her a little more,
Mm-hmm.
we realized that she had been molested when she was younger, and he basically felt like he owned her. And yeah, that's what
And let me ask you
and that
something. But this
manifested.
happened after he died. How old was she when he passed away? Was she already an adult or was she still a kid?
No, she was a teenager,
Okay. All right.
and
Still.
this happened maybe 10 years after he had passed away.
Okay.
I believe that he had been hanging around. I mean, he was an Earthbound. He had been hanging around for a while,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's another one of those cases where stuff was going on that she didn't really realize what it was.
Uh-huh.
But he was actually attacking her at night in
Yes.
bed. I mean, even with her boyfriend there with her,
Oh,
and
I
she
imagine that
was,
would have probably been like,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
We were, and we, of course, if she'd have come clean in the beginning and told us what had happened when she was younger, we could have probably figured it out and probably dealt with it a little
Yeah.
better. But unfortunately, when we were getting involved with the case, this thing was getting upset and getting stronger, and
Oh, yeah.
it got to the point where it really became dangerous at the end.
Yes, I believe it. I believe it. Yeah. Yes. That is, it was like, uh, physical possession in another sense. You can't possess that person in life because you don't have a body to do it. Maybe what he did, when she was a child, but this is the next best thing, which is, yeah. And you know what? I'm probably, if you wouldn't have intervened, she would have had a lifetime of either ruined relationships or God knows what else.
Most likely.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah.
It's interesting how an energy like that can increase in depth to the point where it just, I mean, it becomes out of control like that, and especially somebody who's related to the person. Um, it's people don't do this. It's I guess it's really hard for them to understand. It's hard for me to understand sometimes. But you know, and there's another thing. We were talking about possessions, but even like possessed objects.
Okay.
I was talking about divination, and I don't mind divination, but when it comes to Ouija boards or spirit boards, that's another animal. And I have never liked those things. I had an experience when I was younger, and I saw something that I can't explain. And that's the one thing, for whatever reason, those objects seem to hold spirit energy more so than most others. And I've told people before that, look, if you're going to do a Ouija board, fine, but learn how to clean that thing when you're done.
Sure.
You know,
Or
you know,
close down
just
whatever,
like anything,
whatever.
close it out.
Close it
And
out. Yeah.
when it sits there and festers, and you throw the thing under the bed, you're eventually gonna have a problem.
Well, I think that whenever I interviewed this guy Ed Becker, he wrote this really interesting book. He had a, as a matter of fact, he had an exorcism of his house done back in the 70s, which they televised. But anyway, I interviewed him. He was a great guy, and he was telling me, we're talking about the same subject about Ouija board and all this. And he goes, "What do you think happens if you throw a cell phone in the prison yard? Who do you think is going to reach that phone before everybody else? It's usually the biggest, baddest prisoner in there."
Right.
So that's why people, and I thought that's such a great way of looking at it, as to, this is what happens a lot of time when people start doing the Ouija board, or where they start trying to do, spirit contact. And if you don't know what you're doing, guess who's going to show up? Yeah, the biggest, worst guy that got that phone and said, "Okay, but let me not scare these people. So I'll either pretend I'm a little kid, or let's see, these are teenage girls. I'll pretend I'm a teenage guy." And then, it takes off from there. It's unfortunate, but yes. Yep. That's the one time that you're basically saying, I want to communicate with the spirit world. And sometimes people, like, they do weird shit, and then it's like, yeah, guess what? You're invoking something.
Yeah, it's
You
yeah, I
might
don't
not
like
know what
'em.
you're doing, but it's working.
I just don't like them. I was at a conference one year back. Oh, it was 2013, and my friend Sean was with me, and we were at our table. We were talking to people and stuff, and this guy beside us he sold old Ouija boards.
Wow.
So he pulls out all these Ouija boards. I mean, these old Ouija boards, homemade Ouija boards made out of wood and stuff. And he's sitting these things is right beside me. And I swear, I literally had to get up and move, because the energy coming off those
I
things
can imagine.
was just driving me nuts. And those guys are laughing at me. But I told them, I said, look, I know you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you here, but this is almost like somebody put a poker up against me, a hot poker against me, with those things being on my side.
Let me ask you something. Was he just totally oblivious, or he just didn't feel it? What did he
Had
realize
to be.
he didn't feel anything?
He had to be, because I don't know who the guy was. I know people were familiar with him, and I've talked to people for years about the Ouija boards, and a lot of people just kind of shoo it away and think, there's nothing to that. But I'm telling you, and I told him, I said, I don't know where you got these Ouija boards at, and where you buy them, and what are you doing with them. But man, you ought to really consider having these things cleansed somehow, because
Yep.
you're causing, you're gonna, if somebody goes and buys one of these things, and they got a bad one, they're going to have problems.
Yeah.
And I don't think you want to have that going on. But he didn't really care. So
Oh no, I'm sure that there was people that were probably stupidly attracted,
yeah.
going, "Oh my God, he used
Oh, he
Ouija
was
board!
selling.
Whoa!"
Yeah, he was selling.
It's like, yeah, all right, yeah, you don't know what they use that Ouija board for.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like they were letting something. Oh, and before, one of the things that you mentioned that I wanted to touch base with you, that thing about possessed objects, and I tell everybody, nowadays a lot of people, not only the garage sale, but that people leave a lot of their stuff now on the curbside. They just like, take whatever you want. I tell everybody, you gotta be careful with that.
yeah. Especially if something that looks pretty good shape.
Yeah.
It's out there for a reason.
Or, this was Grandpa's furniture, but Grandpa passed away, and we don't need it anymore. So we'll just put his let's see, we'll put out his easy chair and all his little stuff out there. Enjoy. Yeah. Except Grandpa's going with that. He's not hanging out. He wants to go with his easy chair and his TV. So I tell everybody, you got to be careful. You got to be careful with some of that stuff. Cleanse it, do something. Or at the very least, if you come around it and your gut tells you there's something weird about it, pay attention to it. Walk away from it. Walk away from it.
I can't go into antique stores anymore. I'll go into somebody's house who has a ton of antiques. I grew up around a lot of antiques. My parents, and it didn't really seem to bother me a whole lot then. But boy, I'm telling you, when I go to an antique store now, or somebody's home has got a lot of antiques, I'm not there too long. Believe me, because I'm getting hit from all directions.
Right, because your sensitivity level is so much
more.
Yeah. You're so
it's amazing
to it.
how much energy is attached to objects, especially personal objects, and it's really
yes. I think a lot of it has to do not whether it's old or not, but it's the use. When people constantly use something and they kind of put their personality on it. And I hate to say it, but with antiques, people would keep things. We live more of a disposal type of, society now. Right. But before, especially with antiques, people would keep these things as heirlooms and keep it, and they would pass it down. And that's why I'm saying, that's why, you get that feeling of stuff that it's because it was in constant use by either that one person or even generations, for all you know.
Yeah.
And hopefully they were a healthy, happy person, if you know what I mean.
I don't buy anything old unless I know the history behind it. I never do.
What you mean? Well, anyway, Lon, thank you so much. You have been absolutely wonderful. And to interview, like I knew you would be, because there's so many years of experience and knowledge that you have. And let me ask you, I'm going to put a link to your website on the credits of the show, but for anybody that's listening to the podcast version, what is your website address?
It's phantomsandmonsters.com.
Phantomsandmonsters.com. And over there, you have your blog and also any of the links to your books as well?
Yeah, my my books are actually on Amazon. You just search my name, Lon Strickler, and they'll come up. And my most recent book is the Chicago Winged Humanoids book, which is entitled Mothman Dynasty.
Wow. That's great. That is such... See, it's like, I'm telling you, like I tell everybody, the paranormal is a lot of things. It's not just necessarily ghosts. There's a lot of things out there in the paranormal world that I consider paranormal. But anyway, thank you so much. You have been absolutely wonderful. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and I hope you'll come back in the future and we can discuss some other interesting subjects, which I know you have treasure trove of experiences, stories to talk about.
Hey, that's no problem. You want me to come on, just let me know.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Wow. 1970s, guys. Like that? I got you somebody from the 1970s. What I mean by that is those old timers. Again, somebody that's seen it all, just about all. Because let me tell you something. If there's a good chance that is that when you've been around, if you see the evolution of the paranormal field or whatever. And I laugh when he says, you know, that show In Search Of, because I remember seeing it with Leonard Nimoy, and that was like, woo! It was like, compared to what we have now. But yes, check out his website. I've been there. It's super interesting. He not only does he have the, you know, post blog, he gets contacted by different people reporting things. You know, so on the different either UFO or cryptid sightings, things like that. And that's what happens. This is what I found when people are involved in this field for so many years and they've been established. They're known. So people gravitate to them to either tell them a story, give them a sighting. And what I personally love is this is the stuff that you don't hear about on the shows. These are the real regular people that sometimes they tell these stories and it's almost like they're disbelieving themselves that they've actually seen or experienced this. And of course they talk to somebody like Lon Strickler, because it's like, man, I know you've heard it all, so you're not going to raise your eyebrows at me and go, what? So yeah, as far as that, you know, firsthand regular people reporting encounters that they've had, sightings that they have, experiences that they have, it's people that have been around a long time and have a site where they're known. And like I said, despite what everybody thinks that, oh, you know, everybody wants, you know, all these reality TV paranormal shows, everybody's ready to come out and tell their story. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of people not really. They still, I think because they have a hard time believing it themselves, they're afraid they're going to be judged, or people are going to look at them queer, or they're going to be called a liar, or they're going to be called crazy, because to them, they're like, man, this does not fit in my reality somehow, but I know I saw it. And I need to speak to somebody who's going to say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And by the way, there's all these other thousands of people that have had the same thing happen to them. It's like, oh, thank God. You know, I'm not that weird then. You think, who would think that? Yes, there's a lot of people that do, you know, kind of like, you know, get all caught up in that moment of, oh my God, this just happened to me, or I saw this, just me. And let's face it, it just feels better when you know that other people have experienced something similar. It does not make you feel isolated. And you'd be surprised. There are people out there that have had experiences or sightings. Sometimes it's once. Sometimes it's happened to them that because for whatever the circumstances might be. God, it could be maybe at the beginning they don't talk about it because it's almost like if I don't talk about it, it won't be real. But let's face it, everywhere you go, there you are. You can't escape from yourself. So what happens is that they feel isolated. Sometimes they feel isolated even from their own family. They kind of carry this around with them because they're thinking, if I talk about this, I'm going to, again, be either called a liar, laugh at me, like, or I'm going to get weird looks, or like. So they carry sometimes these experiences or these stories for years, and to actually tell somebody, go, you know what, that one time I was out in the woods, this happened to me. Yeah. And it's like a burden is lifted off of them. And then when you tell it to somebody like Lon, he tells you, well, guess what? You know what? In that area that you described, I've had several people tell me that they had a similar experience. Now, can you imagine for somebody that's been walking around with this deep, dark secret that they don't want to tell anybody? You know how good that feels? Because, and again, this is the point I make. Let's say you've had one of these experiences and you've gone off and you're reading some books because on the side, because you're trying to still keep it on the down low that you had this experience. And you know, some of these stories and these sightings experience never get published. They're not in any book. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. Especially if, let's say, you're talking certain areas or certain things that are like specific. And then you contact somebody that's got a blog that for years has been getting feedback and stories. This is the person that can firsthand tell you, oh yeah, by the way, I've had people that throughout the years have described exactly what you just said. And this person would think, man, I never saw any of the books. No, never made it into any of the books, but I know because I've been told by all these different sources that they had that experience. What? Again, so reach out. If you're walking around with some deep dark, secret experience that makes you a true believer, contact me. Contact me at marlene@miamighostchronicles.com and let me know what it is. Talk to me. You can either email me, I'll interview you. You want to tape yourself, you want to keep it anonymous, I'm good with that. You can either keep it anonymous from me or I'll keep it anonymous from you. Believe me, I'm very good at anonymity and confidentiality. Absolutely 100%. Okay, but I would love to hear your story. And you know what? I might be able to give you some feedback and tell you what I think happened, or if I've heard of similar stories, because I've been doing this for a long time too. So, you hear a lot of stuff, like I said, that is particular. I'm going to give you a perfect example here in South Florida. There's stuff here that happens in South Florida that you're never, ever, ever going to hear about in other parts of the country, because there's just like a certain country. Okay, perfect example. We were talking about the Dutch, powwowing magic that they have up there in Pennsylvania, and he said all the way down to Virginia. That's the only part of the country that you come across that same thing. Different parts of the country, different areas have their own particular belief system or happenings or sightings or experiences. So I can maybe help you out with if you've had a weird experience down here in South Florida, or sometimes, believe me, I've heard a good amount of first-hand stories from people that, you know what, it's incredible. It only happened to them once, but this is like the memory of it, the experience of it, even if it's years and years and years later, they still remember everything with such detail, like if it was yesterday, because it was that it was like it overwhelmed them so much on all levels that memory is like branded into them. So that's what I'm saying, when they tell me these stories, sometimes it's been years since it happened, but they can relate to it with minute detail about their experience. So anyway, guys, catch me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Also, again, like I said, don't forget to send me your true stories. I've got a lot of fantastic guests coming on. Okay, a lot of interesting people, different areas of the paranormal. I am considering, I'm very, very, very close to it, where I'm going to be streaming live, and I will be having a number for you guys to call in, and we can talk about answering your questions, whatever, and we talk about it. Live streaming. It's going to be on the radio, and I'll probably tape it and then upload it to YouTube. But as far as the live stream, it won't be on YouTube. It's going to be on the radio, and I'm going to have a number, and I want to talk to you guys. I want to hear your stories or your questions or whatever the case might be. And like I said, it's all about what's going on, where, like I said, I think a lot of people, when they listen to other people's experiences, a lot of times they think, man, I'm not the only one that this has happened to. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but there's a lot of people that feel that way, that they've never shared it, or in some cases, believe it or not, you will have people that have had experiences that first, they feel cursed, like, why did this happen to me? Why did I have to see that? Why did I have to witness that? Or why did I feel it? Whatever the case might be. Because for them, it's a burden. It's a burden to have had that experience. And even though you can't undo it or erase it, it feels better when you know other people have seen or had the same experience as you. So again, guys, as you can tell, I'm sorry if I've sniffled, but my allergies have been I'm at the end of my day. I woke up and I sneezed a couple of times, and I said, oh, no. And I've been battling all day long with my allergies. So forgive me if I've sniffled on my voice, as you could tell it's going. But again, guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience, sharing this time with me. You are all absolutely wonderful. Until the next time. Also, before I forget, once I do the live streaming on the phone, I will probably post it on Facebook and on Twitter at what time I'm going to stream and what number you can reach me at, so that you guys can queue in, and we'll answer your questions or hear your stories. So take care.